What was the first movie you ever fell in love with as a child? It might not have been the first one you ever saw, but I'm sure we all have that one film or series we became obsessed with at a very young age. And for me and a lot of people my age, there's a high likelihood that the answer to that question is Cars. This film was a huge part of a lot of people's childhoods, including my own, and in retrospect, it's easy to see why. This series about colourful talking cars racing each other was bound to resonate with the mind of a young child growing up in the late 2000s. It had everything they could ever ask for. Marketable characters you could grow fond of and buy a toy of, bright colours, exciting action scenes, and above all, a solid story that was easily digestible for children. The ensuing obsession with it from the generation that grew up with it was only inevitable, and to say I was obsessed with it when I was a kid would only be scratching the surface. For most of my early childhood, I lived and breathed Cars. I watched the original movie and its ensuing sequels dozens of times. I adored Lightning McQueen, Mater, and all the other glup in the cast. I collected toys of these characters like my life depended on it, probably sending my parents back hundreds of pounds in the process. And I played the Cars 1 and 2 video games for hours on end. Of course, as I grew older, my obsession with the series slowly started to fade away, as most childhood obsessions do, but the franchise still held a special place in my heart despite that. And now that I'm an adult with a more developed film taste, I thought it might be fun to go back and rewatch these movies to see if they still hold up, and compile my thoughts on them into this video. All in preparation for the series turning 20 years old this month. Jesus Christ. I'm fully aware that this series hasn't always had the best reputation with people outside of those who grew up with it, so it'll be interesting to see if I still end up enjoying these films after all this time, or if my opinion changes and I end up agreeing with the people who have trashed these films for so many years. Regardless of what my final thoughts end up being though, it's important to remember that this is all just my opinion, and you're free to disagree with it if you want. With all that being said, I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to cover in this video. So let's not waste any more time and start actually talking about these films. Starting of course with the one that started it all. Cars 1. The film that began this series and my childhood fixation with it, and what people widely consider to be the best film in the series. Going into this rewatch, I was really hoping I would end up still liking this film specifically, since it's the one I have the strongest nostalgic connection with, and I'm glad to report that I got my wish. I might not like it as much as I did when I was a kid, but nearly 20 years later, I still think the original Cars is great overall. I honestly don't get people who dislike this film. Spoilers for later in the video, but I can see the reasoning behind not enjoying the sequels. But with this one, I'm not really sure what the film's detractors hate about it so much. It's just all round a really solid film, and one of the biggest reasons why is that it's surprisingly technically impressive. Considering that this film came out in 2006, the animation is phenomenal, and it still holds up really well today. The lighting and the textures on the cars and their environments look really nice, particularly in scenes set during the night. Character motion is also super fluid, and it's genuinely impressive how expressive they were able to make the characters, considering how limiting your characters being cars seems on paper. This film really did set the bar high right out of the gate in regard to the series' animation quality, which would only get better with each following movie. I also found the editing to be super slick too, and the sound design is fantastic. All of these brilliant technical qualities are on full display in the opening scene, which as an aside, is a fantastic scene to start the film with. It drops us right into the action with an exciting opening race, which honestly might actually be the best race in the entire film series. It's thrilling to watch and incredibly engaging, and it's accompanied by one of the many songs featured in this film, which overall are really great additions that contribute a lot to the film's vibe. The opening scene also does a great job introducing us to this world, the characters, and their personalities in a really natural way. Speaking of which, the characters and their stories are another huge reason why this film is so great. There's a lot of surprisingly compelling characters here, one of which of course being our main man himself, Lightning McQueen. Beginning the film as a very likable asshole, his character arc throughout the film is really well developed and well written. He starts out as cocky, arrogant, rude, and very clearly doesn't appreciate his life or the people around him. but he still has enough charisma to make you want to root for him to be better right out of the gate. He then gets humbled really quickly, and after getting stuck in Radiator Springs, he slowly starts to realize the value of his life and the small things in it, and how meaningful having good relationships with other people can be. He learns all this through his interactions with the townspeople living there. Firstly, he meets Mater, who I know is one of the film's most divisive characters, with a lot of people really not liking his brand of humor. Personally, in this first film, I'd say he's a fairly effective and likable comic relief character, who's a suitable amount of stupid in an endearing kind of way. His eventual friendship with McQueen teaches him to care for other people other than himself, which goes a long way in making him less of a prick. Then there's Sally, who's a pretty interesting character in her own right. Someone who in theory had everything but settled down for something smaller and more valuable. She's responsible for making McQueen realize the core message of the film, that life isn't all about the destination you're trying to reach, but also the drive to get there and the small moments you encounter along the way. Finally, there's Doc Hudson, who works as a great narrative parallel to McQueen. They have roughly the same origins, except Doc was able to find new purpose and meaning in his life after his old one was taken away, which changes McQueen's perspective on his life as well. They all end up teaching him so much, without even meaning to, and Lightning becomes a much better person, or car I guess, by the end as a result, completing his solid and well-told story arc. In addition, he also ends up helping them with a lot of their struggles too. He gives Mater a friend, he helps Sally and the other townspeople by fixing their town and putting it back on the map, and he helps Doc accept what happened to him and move on from it. This not only demonstrates his personal growth, it also gives these side characters some much appreciated development too, particularly Doc, who I found to be the most compelling side character in the cast. I also grew fond of the fairly likable supporting cast, even if they don't do much in this film. Though admittedly one minor issue I had with the film was that while I think McQueen is given plenty of reasons to care about the regular townsfolk early on, I don't think the townsfolk were given many reasons to care about McQueen before he revamps the town at the end of the second act. It's only a small gripe, but it does make their sudden change of heart and appreciation for McQueen in the middle feel jarring. Other than that though, I really like the characters and their writing in this film. It helps that their dialogue is surprisingly really good, which helps endear me to them even more. On the topic of things that surprised me about this movie, the biggest shock to my system upon this rewatch was how well paced the film was. Maybe it's because I've become used to how fast paced a lot of modern animated kids films are, but I was taken aback by how slow Cars' pacing was. And I mean that in a good way. The story really takes its time progressing through plot points, giving them each more time to breathe and develop, which I think makes the film overall much better. Now, although I enjoyed this movie overall a lot, I still had a few small issues with it. I think the first act does get a little boring after we first get to Radiator Springs, but thankfully that problem goes away quickly after Lightning and Doc's first race. I also thought that compared to how amazing the race in the beginning of the film was, the final race was a little underwhelming. I think it's mainly because having only 3 cars racing on an extremely simple track isn't as exciting as when there's dozens of them to make it more interesting and challenging. With that being said though, I do like how McQueen demonstrates all that he's learned from his time at Radiator Springs over the course of the race, and the ultimate resolution to the scene is really good too. It's really disappointing when you're a kid to see McQueen lose the race, but from a narrative perspective, this is a great way of concluding his character arc, as it shows that winning isn't as important to him anymore as much as the other people around him. Altogether, the original Cars is a great film that still holds up well to this day. Even as an adult, I still like this film a lot, almost as much as I did when I was a kid. Its great characters, story, and technical qualities make it a good start to this trilogy, and an 8 out of 10 film overall. The question is though, do its sequels carry over what makes this first film so great? Are they worthy follow-ups? Well, there's only one way to find out. Now that we've finished watching this first film, it's time to move on and rewatch the second film, Cars 2. I also enjoyed this film quite a lot when I was a kid. Hell, I've probably watched it more times than the first film. I sure hope it holds up.
2 hours later.
Oh boy. I'm honestly not even sure where to begin this segment. Firstly, because I have so many damn notes that I made when watching this movie, and I have no idea which ones to start with. And secondly, because what even is there left to be said about this film? It's been talked about extensively over the past decade and a half, and not for any good reason. Even as someone who loved it a lot as a kid, I've still been aware for quite some time how infamous this film is among the general public, often being cited as one of the worst animated films ever produced by Pixar. Its reputation has been in the gutter for the past 15 years, and rarely anything else. Now, in the past few years, I have seen more and more people come to this film's defense, and I think that's because, like me, a lot of kids who grew up with it are now old enough to voice their opinions about it. Those opinions, of course, being heavily influenced by nostalgia. To those people, I just want to ask, when was the last time you watched this movie? Because yeah, you may have thought it was really good when you were a kid, but that doesn't mean you would still think it was good if you watched it now, as an adult, with a more developed taste in film. You could have been a kid who loved this movie, obsessed over it, maybe even considered it your favorite at one point, and you still might wind up disliking it if you watched it now. I would know, because I am that kid. As I already mentioned, I was a Cars 2 fiend when I was younger, but after rewatching it for this video, I completely understand why people have been shitting on this film for so long. And before this film's defenders get mad at me for saying that, just know that me saying this hurts me more than it hurts you. It's sad that I don't view a film that was so important to me at one point positively anymore, and I really wasn't expecting to hate it so much. But that's just what I think of the film now, and now I'm gonna try and explain why. I'll get the few positive things I have to say about this movie out of the way first. The animation looks real pretty. It's honestly fantastic and a big improvement over the already great animation in the first film. Take everything I said about that film's animation, double it, and apply it here. I suppose the music is also alright too, and at the very least, I can never say this film is boring. A lot of the time, it's entertaining in a so bad it's good way, and on very rare occasions, it will break out and actually be unironically entertaining. Okay, now on to the bad stuff. This'll take a while. First off, can I just say what an insane decision it was to turn this franchise into a high-octane spy thriller out of nowhere. It's such an out-of-left-field choice for a sequel to a film about racing and learning to appreciate the underappreciated parts of life, and it doesn't take advantage of the premise of all the characters being cars at all. How does that affect the plot of this film? In the first movie, it fits the story since most of the plot revolves around racing, something cars are used for. But here, this could have been just an entirely separate animated spy film with no relation to Cars at all. Why did it need to be a Cars sequel? This bizarre shift in focus makes jumping from the first movie to the sequel so jarring, especially since the tone is now much lighter and kiddier, and the slow pacing of the first film has unfortunately been thrown out for something much faster. Secondly, the plot of this film is so stupid. It's a story that only functions because everyone in it is incompetent, and it hinges on misunderstandings and stupid contrivances. If any of these characters showed an ounce of intelligence or competence, the entire plot would fall apart. The whole reason Mater even gets roped into this spy mission, you know, the main conflict of the film, is because these two supposedly highly skilled agents mistake him for one of their own, and then either never bother to confirm this very important detail with him, or somehow completely misinterpret him straight up telling them he is not a spy for like 40 minutes. This is stupid and frustrating enough on its own, but it's only one of many times something like this happens so the plot can move forward. Plot points that could be prevented if the characters just talked to each other and explained the situation are dragged out to an insane degree to fill the runtime, and any suspension of disbelief you might have when watching is completely shattered by the number of baffling decisions the characters make. Additionally, the whole conflict the film revolves around doesn't make any sense if you think about it for more than 10 seconds. So, the main villain here is basically the car equivalent of Elon Musk, who, by the way, is a really underwhelming villain who's barely in the film, has a boring personality, and whose reveal as the true mastermind behind everything is unceremonious and not built up to at all. Anyway, his main goal is to make alternate fuel sources look bad to the public so they'll continue to buy oil, which he can profit off of. And his way of achieving this is by developing an alternative fuel that'll ignite when hit with an electromagnetic pulse, setting up a worldwide racing competition featuring some of the most famous racers in the game, having all these racers use this alternative fuel in the races as a way to promote it, and then using an emitter disguised as a TV camera to ignite the racer's fuel mid-race, making the public watching think the fuel is dangerous and not want to buy it. This is a fairly elaborate plan. However, when you really think about it, if car Elon Musk wanted to make alternative fuel look undesirable to the public, then there was a much easier way for him to do this without spending millions on the whole racing competition and camera superweapon. Just release the unsafe fuel product to the public, market the hell out of it with his fame and influence so that everyone buys it, and then generate backlash when the public discover how bad it is. This would give alternative fuel a bad name and probably scare millions of cars away from using it on its own. And it's not like a scandal like this would damage his reputation any more than his current plan. If he did this, he would still achieve his primary goal without starting a whole expensive racing competition, and inadvertently getting himself caught when a bunch of spies start investigating the development of his superweapon. So, to summarize, the entire movie only happens because the villain is a dumbass who chose an unnecessarily complicated method of achieving a goal with simple solutions. That, on its own, should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of the writing here. As an aside, I think it's really disappointing that they set up a World Grand Prix, which could potentially be an actually cool idea for a Cars sequel, only to show us barely any of it because we've got to do stupid spy shit instead. I really cannot stress enough how bad the script in this movie is. Not only from a narrative perspective, but also in the dialogue department. So many lines can be picked apart endlessly without much effort.
Welcome, everyone. I wish I could be with you on this very special day.
Descramble that voice.
I'm trying. Oh, it's too sophisticated.
Girl, that's just car Elon Musk's voice pitched down. What do you mean it's too sophisticated?
I called to talk to Mater. It never occurred to me they wouldn't be there.
Sheriff is talking to Scotland Yard right now.
What the hell is Scotland Yard gonna do? At this point, the characters don't know Mater is in England, or anywhere near the UK in general. So why would they go to the police service that operates primarily in the UK to search for Mater, when from their perspective, it would make more sense to go to the Japanese police since that was the country he was last seen in, or the American police since that's where he lives. It's just all round an awful script. The characters in this film also suck. As I've already mentioned, most of them are purposefully stupid and/or incompetent, and many are also way more simplistic than they were before. Mater is the main character in this film, for some reason, and he's way more annoying and stupid on purpose than he ever was in the first film, and is thus way less likable. They also attempt to give him an arc where he realizes that, oh no, nobody takes me seriously, which I guess is fitting because this plot point in and of itself is hard to take seriously. Lightning also acts dumb and out of character in this film, needing to go through an arc of learning to appreciate Mater more and not be ashamed of him, which is a lesson I don't think the Lightning of the end of the last film would ever need to learn. In the process, he acts unnecessarily rudely towards his supposed best friend, including in the scene where they break up towards the beginning, which is so forced and contrived. And it all just comes across as inconsistent, given how we saw Lightning in Cars 1 learn not to be like that towards people around him. Oh, and have I mentioned how unfunny this movie is? Dear lord, the jokes in this movie aren't funny at all, despite them desperately trying to be. Most of them rely on very childish humor that would only appeal to the lowest common denominator, and I found myself groaning at most of them. Finally, the last thing that's really terrible about this movie is the world building. If you've seen any discussion online surrounding these films in the past 20 years, one of the most common talking points you've probably seen being brought up is how awful most people find the world building of this series to be, given how the world revolves around talking cars. And most of that hatred can be traced back to this movie. In the first film, I personally don't think the world building was a problem, since the film was smart enough to keep things simple and only show us parts of this world we needed to see. But in this sequel, our perception of the world is greatly expanded to an unnecessary degree, and all it does is lead me and many viewers to question the logic of how things operate here. Now, initially, I was gonna do a deep dive here into some of the strange things I noticed on my most recent viewing, But to be honest, I've been ranting about this film for quite some time now, and including that would only serve to make this already long video even longer, so I might have to save that discussion for another day. Plus, if you really want to see someone tear into this film's world building and give it its deserved lashings, there are plenty of other videos on that very subject on this website you can watch. I may even link a few of them in this video's description if I find any that I like. In conclusion, this film is just straight up awful on so many levels. Again, I really wasn't expecting to hate it as much as I did, given my fond nostalgic memories of it, but I just can't look past its glaring flaws. If you're someone who grew up with this movie too and hasn't seen it in a while, don't fall for the propaganda perpetuated by other nostalgia-blind people saying it was actually good. Rewatch it for yourself and form your own opinion, and you'll probably realize that everyone you've heard trash this movie for your entire life was probably right. On a good day, I might give this a 3 out of 10, but realistically, it's probably closer to a 2. An abysmal sequel to a first movie I still really liked to this day. Right, now that we're finally done with that, why don't we move on to the final movie in this trilogy? Like the other 2 films that came before it, I really enjoyed this when I was a kid. Though as we've just seen, that can be a little deceptive. This is also the movie I've seen the most mixed reactions about in the series, so this'll probably be an interesting watch if nothing else. Without further ado, let's get into it. Can I just say how insane it is that this has the same average score as Cars 2 on Letterboxd? Like, it's already insane that Cars 2 has a score as high as 3.1 out of 5, but this film being rated almost exactly the same is even more so, since this film is much better than its predecessor. It's actually pretty good. Not quite as good as the first film, but still good nonetheless. Overall though, this is probably the Cars film I have the least to say about, which is funny given how hyped Kid Me was for it in the build-up to its release. You better believe I watched that teaser trailer of lightning crashing 1,000 times when I was younger. Anyway, since I started both of the other film segments by talking about the animation, it makes sense to do the same here. Once again, it's an even bigger improvement than last time. The film's lighting, textures, and environments are now bordering on hyper-realism, and they look fantastic. Additionally, as a nice change of pace, I think it might be interesting to talk about some of the stuff I didn't like about the film first before moving on to its many positives, instead of vice versa. There are a few small issues I had here. Like in Cars 2, I sometimes question the logic of this universe, and it can occasionally get in the way of the story. In particular, there's this one scene where they modify the engine of one of the main characters to be faster so that they can simulate the speed of another racer. And considering how the whole plot is about McQueen trying to keep up with newer racers and falling behind because of his age, it made me wonder why they couldn't just do this to him instead of having him go through all this training to be better. There's also this one scene towards the middle at this demolition derby place that feels entirely pointless and like a huge waste of time. Its only contribution to the story is in its aftermath, where it causes a fight between McQueen and a new character named Cruz, which makes said new character open up more about her past. But that plot point could have been done in a much better way that didn't involve a pointless scene that was probably only included to introduce more characters to make merchandise of. My biggest issue with the film though was probably its villain, Jackson Storm. He is so boring and so underwhelming, and he's barely even in the movie despite how much they reference him as this huge obstacle McQueen needs to overcome. Despite these issues though, the film more than manages to balance them out with a variety of positives that make it an overall good movie. I think the characters are handled pretty well in this one. McQueen is given a new arc about accepting that it's okay that he might be getting old and might not be at the top of his game anymore, as there's still plenty to enjoy in training the next generation of racers and competing alongside them, and I think it's relatively solid. It's set up really well in the film's extended opening, with him becoming so worried about potentially becoming outclassed that he begins to fall back into old habits he left behind years ago, like refusing to pit stop properly so he can get ahead in the race, which ultimately backfires and leads to that famous scene of him crashing, which is a pretty effective scene all things considered. His journey of acceptance thereafter feels very natural and well developed. I like how they parallel McQueen's journey with Doc's, showing that he also had the same struggles, but learned to overcome them and find new purpose, foreshadowing what McQueen will eventually do in the final act. He also develops a really good bond with his new trainer, Cruz, who is also a great supporting character in the film. She's pretty likable, and her backstory of wanting to be a racer more than anything, but never getting the opportunity, was good too. Her relationship with McQueen is very well rounded, with her bringing out the best in him, and McQueen slowly teaching her important racing skills without even realizing it. Both of their journeys conclude effectively in the climax, with McQueen giving up his opportunity to get the glory he's been after the entire film so that Cruz can finally get a shot at her dream, realizing in the moment that giving new talent opportunities to succeed is more important than him clinging on to his own ambitions as a veteran racer. Altogether, this film probably has the best climax in the series, both from a narrative perspective and in terms of the final race's spectacle. Overall, Cars 3 isn't a perfect film. It has quite a few rough edges, but I still like it at the end of the day because what is good about the film is super solid and far outshines its negatives. It's a good 7 out of 10 film, and a pretty good final chapter in this trilogy. So, that was an interesting experience. Gotta say, it was really fun going back and watching these movies that were so integral to my childhood, and I'm glad to say that I think at least 2/3 of this series still hold up now. I still very much enjoy the first film, and consider it to be one of the better films Pixar has put out in their time. And while I don't enjoy it nearly as much as I did when I was a kid, I still have an appreciation for the third one. Of course, my opinion on Cars 2 did change drastically in this rewatch, and now I don't really like it all that much, but I still think the series overall is good, and I'm glad I grew up with it. I'm also glad that you, yes, you the viewer, have made it this far into the video. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to see more videos like this one in the future about my random interests. Make sure to also leave a comment telling me your thoughts on the Cars franchise. For now though, thank you all so much for watching.